Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we have another open Q&A. The way we're going to structure this one is we will start talking about the Rings of Power and then go on to sort of broader Lord of the Rings questions and then end up with more. I've got quite a few Song of Ice and Fire questions as well this week. So obviously there will be spoilers for Season 2, Episode 5 of the Rings of Power. Which was released my time just this morning. So I appreciate not everyone's had a chance to see it yet, but I had a couple just so you're aware of what sort of going forward I'm going to be doing on this channel. I've had a few people in the chat before we went on air saying, hey, why are we getting so many open Q&As? It was an attempt on my part to cover the fact that we've got the Rings of Power happening, and I know there are a lot of people who want to talk about the Rings of Power, but also I wanted to make sure we covered other things as well. But I get the feeling a lot of people are missing the more topic-focused live streams that we've done quite a few of over the last few months and years. I think from next week, what I will do is I'll kind of change the order around, do a focused topic for the first half of the live stream on a Thursday, and then the second half, those who have seen the Rings of Power episode, which will have just come out, and wish to talk about it, we'll do a Q&A there, so you can pick and choose which bit you have. But yeah, I've also missed doing the deep dives into particular topics, so we will go back to doing that next week. But let me know what you think. If you're watching this back later, hi, by the way, I know a lot of people watch these back not live, but they watch them a bit later. I see you. Thank you very much. Just let me know down in the comments if that works for you, or if not, that would be fantastic. Right, so this time we're going to go straight into questions about the Rings of Power. And Rassler saying, good day, Robert. I hope you and Dan the dog are well. We are, thank you. The stranger is all but confirmed to be Gandalf at this point, which is disappointing, and I really hope if the Dark Wizard is an Astari, he is not Saruman, but a Blue Wizard. Tolkien originally wrote that the Blue Wizards failed in their mission and fell to evil, starting dark magic cults, but Tolkien in later writings appear to have changed his mind and wrote that they were in fact very successful in their mission, and then fell later, perhaps. So, is it possible that the show will introduce the other Blue Wizard and have him be good and fulfill Tolkien's updated version of having the two wizards opposing each other, thereby fulfilling both versions of what Tolkien wrote about? Okay, really interesting question to get started. I thought I'd use this as a kind of conceptual how I'm seeing the Rings of Power evolve, which is to say that whereas I think we often are looking at this as how is this fitting in with all the different writings for Tolkien for the Second Age, I don't think that's the starting point for the showrunners. The showrunners, I don't think they're coming at this thinking, well, how do we've got this information. They don't have access, they don't have the rights to use quite a lot of what Tolkien wrote. And I don't think their approach is, first of all, to say, how can we try and get this bit of information across? Their approach, I think, the starting point is to write what they consider to be a good TV show, set within Tolkien's world. So that's quite an important distinction, which means that I think if we're sort of trying to weave our way through and say, oh, is it Blue Wizards? Are they trying to show us how this version of what Tolkien wrote might tie in with this version? Personally, I don't think that's the right way to approach this. I think if we're trying to get inside the showrunner's head, we should be thinking, what do they think makes good TV? So, with that in mind, yes, I agree completely that all of the hints now are that the stranger is Gandalf, to the extent to which I think if this isn't now Gandalf, then that's because the showrunners want us to think it, and they've given us those clues, and then they'll do a little switcheroo or something. But I think we can bank the fact that the stranger is now Gandalf. Who is this dark wizard? Well, we've not had huge amounts of clues. I think visually he does look closer to Saruman, you have to say. He certainly doesn't seem to be wearing blue. We've had no hint of another wizard anywhere else. So I think the idea that this is a blue wizard situation might be a little bit of a stretch going on there. But I think what one thing that the showrunners have said in the past a couple of times is, I can remember an interview with them even before season 1 came out. It was when we first learned that there would be Harfoots, proto-hobbits, and they said, we couldn't imagine Middle-earth without hobbits. And at the time, I can remember thinking, well, all right, you can justify this in the lore if you wish to. And I cut slack for anyone who suddenly gets a Lord of the Rings franchise to play with. If they want to do something with it, we're probably all the same. If they particularly love the hobbits, including the hobbits, fine. But they've said similar things about others, that we can't imagine Middle-earth without a wizard, etc. So I think this is where we need to be coming from on this. Now, the asterisk there is, this doesn't mean it necessarily makes bad TV. You can write something within Tolkien's world, within Tolkien's legendarium, that is good TV, even if it doesn't fit exactly Tolkien lore. And I'll leave that to everyone to decide for themselves if they like the TV show or not. But in terms of us interpreting it, I don't think the starting point is, are they now trying to accurately represent this bit of Tolkien's legendarium? And Ranabir Mitra is saying, I've mentioned in my questions for last week, this entire storyline in the East should be scrapped. It is noticeable with the storyline in the East with the Harfoots, with the Stranger. It's 1.5 seasons in now. It's still had pretty much zero connection with the rest of the main plot, which is quite a long lead-in. I know they're going on a 5-season arc, so the assumption has to be that at some point this is going to tie in with the main plot. Assuming this is Gandalf, then I think that they will get him to be opposing Sauron at some point, but presumably for the rest of the season he's still off in the East, learning his name, finding his staff, whatever. So I think we're now looking at season 3 before this plotline ties in with the rest. RJ saying, hey, Robert, not a specific question, but I have to say I'm really enjoying the relationship between Durin and Durin Sr. Seeing their struggle and also the relationship with Durin's wife is really nice. A very refreshing take, and compared to the previous iterations of dwarves on, particularly compared to previous iterations of dwarves on screen. Also thought it would be cool to mention that I'm an actor. I actually auditioned for Theo in season 1. I've got a busy weekend of auditions ahead. Wish me luck. Well, good luck. Break a leg. That's it's really cool. So I hope you get one of the parts that you're going for. As for the dwarves, I have to say yes. Overall, I have my quibbles, but overall, I think that the presentation of the dwarves thus far has been really good. One of the highlights of the Rings of Power for me, seeing inside Khazad-dûm to start with at its height, fantastic. Always wanted to see that. When you go through, we saw it in the Peter Jackson films, we saw Moria. This is like the millennia later, what's left of the fantastic dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm, and here seeing it with the sort of the light coming in, with things growing, with the mechanisms, with the lift thing working, the mining happening. It's brilliant. I absolutely love that. And in terms of representation of dwarves, I think it's Peter Mullen, the actor who plays Durin Senior, has done a fantastic job so far. Really appreciated that. I think the dwarves as a whole have given them a lot more dignity, given them a lot more culture than we've seen from previous representations of dwarves on screen. So I'm very pleased with that. And yes, the kind of the father-son dynamic and the relationship with Disa, I think I would agree. It's one of the highlights of the show. Let's go to a question from Sir Friend. Happy Thursday, Robert, and to you too, sir. I won't hear the answer for this to this for a few weeks, as I haven't started season 2 of Rings of Power yet, and I'm avoiding spoilers. Well, hello, future you, for whenever you do reach this. I'm no expert on Lord of the Rings lore. Apparently, the inclusion of Gandalf, despite some people in season 1 saying that wasn't Gandalf, is a big deviation from the source material. Yeah, Gandalf should arrive around the year 1000 of the Third Age, so he should not be here. I mean, we always have to caveat these things by saying Tolkien did leave huge gaps in his Second Age timeline, so we can't say he definitely wasn't around, but there's absolutely no hint that he was. And whenever we read about Gandalf, it's as if going in the Third Age, that was when his mission was, and he was there. We've recently discovered way back in time, a lot earlier than this, but going back in the Second Age isn't there. Are there any particular characters you would like to see included in the show that would also be different from the source material? For instance, wouldn't it be amazing to somehow get Ungoliant on screen? Looking forward to catching up on Rings of Power content in a few weeks. Best wishes, warmest regards. Well, back to you. In terms of Ungoliant, we did sort of very nearly-ish. And I quite liked how they did it, to be honest. There was it episode 1 of the first season, maybe? They showed the 2 trees of Valinor. They told the story of Morgoth. They didn't talk about Ungoliant, but when Morgoth was there with this kind of backstory, you got this kind of big shadow over the trees, which looked kind of spiderish, and they probably didn't have the rights to do it. But they kind of showed it. And I thought that looked really good. So I was very pleased with that. Yes, I would obviously love to see Ungoliant at some point. My dream, I've said this many times, my dream is for a really, really high quality animated series going through the Silmarillion. I think that would be amazing. But in terms of sort of characters, I think one character that apparently will at some point appear in the TV show and is there in the Second Age is Glorfindel. And the thing is, though, that we don't get any record of anything that Glorfindel did in the Second Age. It's more... So his appearance in the Second Age was more Tolkien going, yeah, I suppose he probably should be there. So his backstory, for those who don't know, was he died in Middle-earth in the First Age heroically, killing a Balrog. Obviously, elves are immortal, so his soul went down to the halls of Mandos, and basically he got fast-tracked back out from there into Valinor, and then the Valar said, no, can you go back to Middle-earth, please? You're doing a very good job. Can you go and do that? So he sort of got recycled back into Middle-earth, and Tolkien originally thought Third Age, but then as he was developing his world, he realized that actually, given in the Third Age, it's just because Valinor has been taken out of the physical plane of Arda by this point, actually he did need to come in the Second Age, not in the Third Age. So he said he came in the Second Age and then just didn't write anything much about it. But as I say, Tolkien didn't write huge amounts about the Second Age, so that's not a massive surprise. But yeah, in terms of other shows, I would just love to see those First Age heroes, and also the Valar, the Tulkas and Ulmo would be amazing to see. Right, let's have a quick flick into the chat. Martin S. saying, good evening, Robert. Do you think we will see Barad-dûr being built at some point in the show? Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. Certainly. So in the Tolkien timeline, this should have happened already. In Tolkien's timeline, um, Sauron, I think, is around the year 500 of the Second Age. He starts moving around. I think it's somewhere around 700 and something that he starts building Barad-dûr. And then after that, he comes out as into the world as Anatar. So Barad-dûr construction had already started. So they obviously shifted all of that timeline around, and at some point, Sauron will, my best guess, without any inside information on this, after his grand plans in Eregion go awry, when the elves, and assuming we have the War of the Elves and Sauron, and the elves and the Númenóreans push him back to Mordor, that is probably the point at which he solidifies his homeland, builds Barad-dûr, and Mordor becomes properly the place that we know. So that's my best guess. I don't think that's going to be this season. If I had to guess, season 3 for that. So you could have like the first bit of season 3 is the War of the Elves and Sauron, and then end up with him being sort of building Barad-dûr. Season 4, he could be off in Numenor. Season 5, we could have the culmination of the Second Age. Andrew Case saying, I don't know, me personally, I still find a bit of lacking seriousness with the Dwarven plot, not seeing this deep cultural exploration either, other than a father-son dynamic. I mean, I think that's entirely fair. What I mean by this is they seem to have cut down hugely on what a lot of other adaptations done, which is use the dwarves as the butt of jokes. We get a whole lot less of them belching while eating and getting out of breath while running and all of those kinds of things. They're treating them seriously. The seeing Khazad-dûm itself, that really works for me. And one thing that they have added in, which I actually really like, is the and I can't remember exactly what they call them, but what Disa does with the sort of the stone singing, and that's the way for them to sort of understand the mountain and the mines and things like that. Thought that has worked really well for me as well. So it was also good. We on occasion we've been seeing some female dwarves as well, which have been very rare sightings in other adaptations. So it's more an opening up of here's a dwarf civilization rather than giving it the massive, like, incredibly strong roots. A quick flick through the Andrew K. Did anyone buy the rights to the Silmarillion? There were rumors last year, but not sure if anyone did. We've certainly not heard of it. For those who don't know, just the Tolkien rights are very complicated because there's a huge amount of money involved, and Tolkien basically sold off what today we'd probably say may have lacked in business sense. He sold off not just like rights for a certain period, but rights forever for the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, basically, but not the Silmarillion or anything else. The Silmarillion hadn't come out during his lifetime, so those rights have been sort of divided out in various places. The rights to make TV shows from those books is what Amazon currently have. The rights to the Silmarillion to make adaptations from the Silmarillion remain with the Tolkien estate, and as of this moment, they have not ever been sold to anyone. Question from Martin S. How many seconds would it take Glorfindel in the Fellowship of the Ring to defeat Sam Tarly in Game of Thrones in a sword fight, leaving aside Glorfindel sparring Sam? one if he wanted to, but yeah, it's one of those things. Glorfindel would never. He's shining with brightness of how wonderful he is. I suspect he would uh, be kind on Sam rather than um, show him up by defeating him in uh, like just a minute, which he definitely could. Vladimir Mitra saying, "I think Sam will win. Glorfindel will sense his heart and submit willingly." Uh, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. As I said, I don't think Glorfindel would um, in any way embarrass him. No. Let's go. Actually, Vladimir Mitra question from Patreon saying, "Salutations, and to you too, sir. I found episode 5 of The Rings of Power to be such an upgrade, and I feel that's because of Charles Edwards, Charlie Vickers, and no Poundland hobbits and wizards." Well, just to quickly pick up on that, yeah, I think for me, particularly Charles Edwards, who's the actor who plays Celebrimbor, I think he's very good actor. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of this season where he goes with this, because from what we've seen from the trailers, then and what should happen, he's going to go to quite a dark place. So I think we're going to see all of his acting chops come out. I think the dynamic for me, I would say that the best thing this season, possibly the best thing in all of the Rings of Power I've seen so far, is this developing dynamic between Anatar and Celebrimbor. So I'm really enjoying that. And even though the setup is not Tolkien lore, the feel, which is quite intangible, quite hard to put your finger on, but the feel seems right. This is Anatar seems fair, but is also clearly very manipulative. So yeah, I'm really enjoying that. What do you think Disa sensed in that lake? I believe it's the Watcher in the Water, especially considering that we got introduced to the Doors of Durin. Are we to assume that Disa's singing woke the Watcher? Because the dwarves have used this west gate to jetpack to Eregion a lot this season and have had no issues thus far. Right, so this I mean, my short answer is no. I think this is the Balrog. I'll get to why in just one moment. In terms of the Watcher in the Watcher in the Water should not appear for a very, very long time. The Watcher in the Water only comes to the surface, we're told, or at least is this the speculation that we get in World, when we get Balin's attempt to retake Moria. And this, I think I've probably covered this in previous videos, but Balin and his colony come in there. They have some initial success. The orcs just kind of pause and decide, well, how are we going to get rid of them? And so they decide to block up effectively the west end of Moria. So there's no escape out of the west end. The way they do that is they dam up the river, which sort of goes there, goes past the west gate, the Doors of Durin. That created that large pool, and then and we don't know exactly how, but the Watcher in the Water came up into that pool. Until that pool was there, then there was nowhere for the Watcher in the Water to go. So that is we're talking here nearly 3,000 years into the Third Age. So a long way into the future here. Now, as I say, I wouldn't put it past the showrunners to bring that in if they decided that they wanted to. But given the fact that we've already been introduced to the Balrog, we've been shown the Balrog. If you remember it back in season one of the episodes, I can't remember which one it was, ended with just showing us the Balrog. And they didn't do anything else with that. It was just like, and there's a Balrog here, guys, and this is Chekhov's Balrog. Something's going to happen. My best guess is roughly they're going to accelerate forward and tell the third age story of Durin's Bane, but bring it into the second age. I would guess that's what's going on here. Part of the reason is that the dwarves' involvement in this story should largely be coming towards an end. In Tolkien's version, what happens is that by this point, they've had a very long friendship with Celebrimbor, trade for a long period of time. Those of Durin are there as a peacetime door. This is wonderful. It's got a password. We had Navi here in this episode saying, and a password known only to friends. It's not a password known only to friends. It's literally written on it, say friend, speak friend, and enter. So this is just for anybody. You can just come up and say the word friend and walk into Khazad-dûm. So what was I going with all this? So in that timeline, once Eregion falls, the dwarves then shut the gates, block themselves in, and basically we don't see them or much of them at all again until the Third Age. They just focus in on the mining stuff. Now, some dwarves do appear, some dwarves are involved in the Last Alliance, but in terms of geopolitics, that's them largely done. I suspect that the showrunners won't want to just get the dwarves, shut the doors, and say goodbye, because they clearly like the dwarf plotline. So I suspect that is why we've seen the Balrog, because they're going to do the Third Age story in the Second Age. Samantha Drake saying, sad that Galadriel is not a mum in the Rings of Power. Celebrian would be another canon female character. Erasing that uniquely female part of Galadriel is disheartening. We never get to see powerful mums in fantasy. God bless. Well, thank you, and to you. Yes, and there's a lot of bits of Galadriel that are missing, shall we say? As a character, then she is, she was when she was much younger, much more action-based is probably the way we would say it. She did appear to be in a fighter, so those bits, and she was very proud. That's a word that Tolkien uses for her 2 or 3 times. So those elements are definitely there, but by cutting out Celeborn, which they have, and Celebrian, her daughter, who was born during the Second Age, then that does definitely take away a big part of her character and her character development. And it also, I do wonder whether this is because this would confuse the dynamic with Elrond, because Elrond will marry Celebrian. So Galadriel is Elrond's mother-in-law, basically, whereas they've set up Elrond and Galadriel as being these great old friends. So yes, I would agree that's an important element that they've sort of taken away, or not presented. It would not surprise me if we certainly get, I think they confirmed that Celeborn will be appearing at some point. Celebrian, I guess not. She's certainly not mentioned having a daughter by this point, which you'd have thought that she probably would have done, which means that she probably hasn't in show. And I suspect they probably don't want to go down the pregnant Galadriel route. If they're wanting her to be this all-action hero, then we probably won't see that. Northern Tommy saying, interesting how proud can be a good or bad thing based on context. It's good to be proud of your accomplishments, but too much pride is often bad. Yeah, Tolkien Tolkien more often uses pride in a more negative sense, it has to be said. And certainly in the way that he uses it when referring to Galadriel, that's how he means it. She was full of pride, and that was part of her big character arc, is to get to the point where she is not full of pride. Let's go to Commander Ray. With the Balrog being alluded to again, I wanted to ask your thoughts on what would happen if Durin's Bane was able to secure Isildur's Bane, and if it would still find its way to Sauron. Okay, so what if? And this is thank you for this. This is got me thinking. Oh, would that make a good video? So if in 2 or 3 weeks' time you discover what if the Balrog got the One Ring video appearing, thank you. So, uh, what if the Balrog got the One Ring, which in the Third Age was entirely possible, because when the Fellowship were going through Moria, don't forget, Frodo had the One Ring, and those guys, Gandalf basically says, fly, you fools, go away. That's him protecting them and the One Ring as much as anything else. You cannot face this foe, only I can. But he was very clear: don't just hang around there. You get out, and I'll deal with this guy. And I suspect at least part of his quick thinking there is that the most important thing was to make sure that the Balrog did not get anywhere near that One Ring. Because we have to remember, with the Balrog is a Maya, is on the same kind of power level as the Istari, so Gandalf, Saruman, Radagast, and also Sauron. Now, not all Maya are at the same level. Radagast was notably less powerful than, say, Saruman, Sauron, greater still, but he's up there. And the way that Tolkien introduces this character, we take it for granted now. When we read the book, we watch the film, because we know it's going to turn up. Oh, the Balrog's here. This is an unspeakable terror from the mists of history, who everybody thought that they're gone, they don't exist anymore. Tolkien shows, when you read it, you see that Gimli, I think he drops his axe. Legolas basically just freezes and swears. The people who actually know what this is, they face anything, but this is crazy. It's like the party is set out, and they're facing these other things that they can deal with, and suddenly this is such an overpowered opponent coming out of nowhere, completely unexpected. Nobody thought that this would be here, and I mean, obviously they know of Durin's Bane, but that this would face them at this point. This is supposed to be a huge shock, and taking down Gandalf is supposed to be a massive deal. Again, we kind of take it for granted these days. So if the Balrog got the One Ring, then he would be hugely powerful and almost unstoppable, would be my basic guess. Tolkien did, in one of his letters, he did sort of go down. I mean, it's almost like the kind of videos that us YouTubers write. He did sort of go down this kind of speculatory road. What if Gandalf got the ring? And he basically came to the conclusion that Sauron without the ring would probably just about be outmatched by Gandalf with the ring. So I think we can say that there's a fair to middling chance that the Balrog would be able to defeat Sauron. Now, we know what Sauron would be doing if he got the One Ring. What about the Balrog? Well, I think the only honest answer is we don't 100% know. I mean, death and destruction, presumably fiery bad things. But the character of the Balrog, this particular Balrog, we don't know the name. It is named Durin's Bane because that's the name that people gave it, but we don't know what the Balrog's name was. One attribute we have to say is this was a very patient Balrog. Waited deep underground for hundreds, thousands of years, waiting for its moment. So this isn't just like, oh, got the One Ring, I'm now going to go and destroy everything. There may well be a little bit more planning going on. Let's go to pardon me. Let's go to a question from Rabbi Mitra. In your Legends of Middle-earth video on Glorfindel, you mentioned that elves that have seen the light of the two trees eventually become visible in the unseen realm. So when Merdania went to the unseen realm after wearing that first ring for man, shouldn't Celebrimbor have been able to spot her there? Is this a mistake by the showrunners, or are my concepts incorrect here? This is a really interesting one because it's not... Tolkien doesn't dive into this in huge detail, so we know just a few principles. When Frodo, in the Fellowship of the Ring, when Frodo wakes up again in Rivendell, and he's been healed by Elrond, and Gandalf, pardon me, a little bit of a cough today, Gandalf sort of is there waiting for him, and we get a little bit of Frodo sort of saying, so, what happened, what was going on? And he says, I saw this kind of shining figure. And Gandalf says, oh, yeah, that was Glorfindel. And he says this: those who have dwelt in the Blessed Realm live at once in both worlds, and against both the seen and the unseen, they have great power. And he goes on to basically say, and Glorfindel is he's one of the first, and he's incredibly powerful. So that's why he's bright and shiny there. Now, so if you have lived within the light of the two trees of Valinor, if you've been over in the Undying Lands, then you do have this kind of like you coexisting in the physical and the spiritual realms, which is quite important because I did do a video ages ago, I can't remember if it's still up, about the nature of Valinor. Because Valinor, the Undying Lands, it was very much a part of the physical world. But then by the time we get to the Third Age, it's kind of been removed to be, it's not quite just the spiritual realm, but it's definitely not just like on an asteroid above the Earth kind of thing. So there is a much more spiritual element to that. And quite a few of the elves, in the Noldor elves that we find in the Second Age, will have spent some time in the Undying Lands. Celebrimbor was born in the Undying Lands. We do not know what he came across with the Noldor, with Feanor's rebellion, when Feanor went looking for or trying to retrieve the Silmarils. We don't know how old Celebrimbor was at the time. He's Feanor's grandson. So we don't know exactly how long he was there in the Undying Lands with the light of the two trees. But yes, definitely there will be an element of that. Galadriel, we don't actually ever get to see this specifically, but she should be not quite perhaps as bright and shiny as Glorfindel, but along those lines. Now, does this mean that you can see things in the unseen realm yourself? Possibly, although it doesn't seem quite that straightforward. We have, if you dig into Galadriel's history. If you go into Unfinished Tales, which is a fantastic book, lots from Tolkien. It's basically a whole series of like mini essays or stories that Christopher Tolkien has grabbed from his father's work and sort of arranged them. There's I don't know, a dozen or so different chapters things there. One of the chapters is the history of Galadriel and Celeborn, which he immediately starts out by saying, this is incredibly complicated. There were lots of different versions about what happened in all of my father's notes. So it's sometimes quite hard to tell exactly what happens, but it seems pretty clear that during this part of the Second Age, Galadriel was in Eregion with her husband. And when Anatar came in there, and she didn't trust Anatar, but it's not clear that she knew who Anatar was. Certainly, it seems that Gil-galad and Elrond didn't seem to know who he was, but she seems to not know exactly who Anatar might be. Tolkien writes a few slightly different speculatory thoughts on this one, but if she did know, she certainly didn't tell anyone. I think the best guess we've got is that she could tell that he was a spiritual being, but she could not remember him from being in this Anatar, from being in the Blessed Realm while she was there as well, and that sent some alarms going, which seems to imply that when she looked at him, she didn't just see this kind of fiery horribleness that Mirdania in the show seems to see. So it's one of these things where we have to say it will be good to have a clear answer from Tolkien on this, but he didn't fully set out all of the steps to help us understand exactly who can see what in the spiritual realm, why and when. Having the rings does certainly seem to be that's your strong connection in with the spiritual realm. So with a ring, you can see things a whole lot more clearly. Let's go to another Ranabin Mitra question. I rewatched your Who Wrote the Legendarium in World video because Círdan in episode 2 mentioned Rumil's verses. Círdan in the show also called Rumil a drunkard. Wanted to ask your opinion on the writer of the Ainulindale being a drunkard living in Tirion. Is there any evidence in the Legendarium of elves having pubs or something? So yeah, I think I thought this was quite fun. To be honest, I've got no. Círdan seemed to have quite a cheeky glint in his eye when he was saying that, but elves do like wine. This is we always have to, I think, try and get past in our mind how Peter Jackson represented elves as this kind of ethereal, good, beautiful creatures. They have that element to them, but if you read The Hobbit, then when we come across Thranduil's elves, a huge part of the plot is the fact that they like drinking wine. This is a massive part of this plot because they're feasting when the dwarves stumble across them. They're feasting, and then we get when they all escape. They're in barrels, wine barrels, and there's a big banquet going on. So, and we hear about where Thranduil he gets his way. He obviously can't be have his vineyards in the forest, but yeah, there's just off to sort of the southeast from there. There's humans have got vineyards, and so he's got this kind of trade arrangement going on with them, going through Lake Town. So yeah, elves do like wine, and they do, at least some of them, like to get drunk. So I personally have no problems with the idea of Rumil being one of those elves. Chris Williams just saying, dropping in to say evening to Robert and Dan and the fantastic Wads. Well, good evening to you too. Let's go to Gina Z. What are your thoughts or theories on the identity of the recipients of the 9 rings for mortal men in the Rings of Power? How many do you think we have already met? Well, I've got a few other people ask similar questions, but I will pick this one up now. So, 9 rings for mortal men. What do we know from Tolkien is these went to the great men in Middle-earth who became mighty kings and sorcerers of the age. Beyond that, 3, we're told, went to Númenóreans. At least 1 went to a guy called Cumall the Easterling, and the rest we don't know. So how might they replicate this on the TV show? I think definitely they're going to do some in Númenor. We've only got 3 human kingdoms that we've been told about really so far on the TV show. We've got Númenor itself. We've got this the sort of the Southlands, which now is, as far as I can tell, mostly based in Pelagia, and then we've got Rhun and the East. So I think we should be looking for people in all of those places. I think we will definitely have a character from Rhun. I mean, I have heard people speculating maybe the wizard isn't actually a wizard, but actually he's or isn't actually an Astari, and he is going to become Cumall the Easterling. I think we will meet a character there, perhaps in season 3, who will be called Cumall. In the Pelagia, the human settlements down there, I've long assumed that Theo was going to become a Nazgul. He's just far too much going on a dark path right from very early on. Loves holding that sword. Says he makes him feel powerful. These are all kind of massive red flags. It wouldn't even surprise me if he becomes the Witch King. And then on Númenor, I mean, I think the easy somebody said this. One of my patrons has said this. I think Kemen is definitely the leading candidate, particularly in this last episode. They're setting him up just to be really unpleasant and desperately wanting power. So he's pretty obvious. Up to 2 more. It shouldn't be Farazon. I do wonder whether they'll be able to resist the idea of having a female Nazgul, so they might go for Aarien. And there's also, and I've forgotten his name, Farazon seems to have like this right-hand man guy, who was the person who started out the Farazon chant, so perhaps him as well. So my best guess is definitely Theo and Kemen, somebody from the from Rhun that we probably haven't met yet, and probably at least one of those other 2 Númenórean characters that we have met. So we know 3 or 4 of them. It may well be that they, outside of 5 or so, they'll show us 5 or so, and then say, and in other lands further away, we've also distributed a few more rings, that kind of thing. James Boros saying, my English teacher brain really wants to ask this. Do you think the Rings of Power is missing so much of the pastoral ethic and the themes of restraint, humility, quietude? And if so, why? Sorry, this has come off as an essay. It's not an essay. Is it missing the pastoral ethic and the themes of restraint, humility, and quietude? Yes, I think for me, I think it is a bit the. I mean, we all have, what makes Middle-earth feel like Middle-earth. For me, the starting point for Tolkien, we have the Shire, which is this was, and if you ever read him talking about where he grew up. There's a little bit in the introduction to the that he did to the Lord of the Rings, but also in a few other places around the village of Sarehole in the Midlands in the UK. And the way that he talks about it is very much this is home. This is how life should be. An idealized version of that is how life should be, and we haven't got that here in Rings of Power. So we don't have the Shire. We've got an itinerant community of hobbits, proto-hobbits, who've just met another one who it's certainly they're not living in a green and lush land. We don't have Lothlorien yet. Rivendell doesn't appear yet. The places that we do have are, I mean, even Lindon. The main thing they were showing is the fact that Linden's, the leaves of the trees were falling and things like that. So we haven't had that grounding sort of pastoral scene that feels like home. We've got lots of places that perhaps could have been, but evil's kind of creeping in. So yes, I kind of miss that. Personally, the question is, should that be there in the Second Age? And from a kind of a literary perspective, because the Second Age is, I mean, Tolkien describes this as quite a dark time. And so the absence of having that home actually perhaps is right. Perhaps the fact that we are yearning for something is the point. So there, I hope as a sort of a replying in kind to your English teacher brain, I hope that kind of makes sense to you. Martin S. I get the feeling that Thranduil's wood elves are a bit more earthly than elves who have been in a man. Granted, they probably have good wine in a man too. Yes, they. I would agree, definitely. There is a temptation, though, I think, to be saying, oh, the elves who have been over in the Undying Lands are sort of like at a higher level and therefore not wishing to be, they wouldn't be partaking in this. You just have to look back at the first stage. The elves, the Noldorin elves who came across, these are not refined characters. These are vengeful, earthy characters who come across, the Sons of Feanor in particular. So I think it varies from elf to elf, as much as we might think of like the high elves as being sort of above such things, and the sort of the wood elves of Thranduil's woodland kingdom being more kind of feasty oriented. There is an element of that, but I don't think that's the whole story. One thing I did like, just as an aside, is Keller Brimbor's first age wine as a concept. So I've been keeping hold of this for hundreds of years. I thought that was really quite fun. Curse Ballerina, would all ring bearers have to start off as obviously evil? Can a ring not slowly corrupt as a philanthropist? Can a ring not slowly corrupt a philanthropist? Wouldn't Sauron take glee in that? Yeah, absolutely. But I think there has to be the start of something. So at a very high level, I've no idea how they're going to do this in the Rings of Power, but at a very high level, Sauron went around and said, I've got a magic ring which will grant you great power, which will allow you to achieve the things you want to achieve. the kind of person who would not be tempted by that is the kind of person, yeah, but I'm happy as I am. I don't need great power. I don't want great power. I just want to be here with my family, with the garden, whatever. That kind of person would not accept a ring. The kind of person who wants a ring of power is the kind of person who has a thing that they particularly are wanting, and those are the people that Sauron would be targeting. Now, you're absolutely right. I'm sure that he could use the power of the rings to be corrupting, seemingly incorruptible and wonderful people. But what he was wanting to do with the distribution of those rings was to get people who were in positions of power across the world. And that meant not just getting random nobodies off in the middle of nowhere, people who were what their desires were, where their power was heading, is towards positions of more power. Um, Callie Summers, can you have wine in Amman? If nothing dies or rots, can you have fermentation? Yeah. Uh, yeah, you can. The things grow, and when you things not dying or rotting, I think it with Tolkien, it's always I find useful, although he's a man of language, clearly, not to just to try and take the feel of the language rather than the uh, these things as a sort of a hard and fast rule. Um, Creation of wine absolutely could happen over there. Um, Commander Ray. Hello, Robert, Dan, and chat. This was my favourite episode of the show so far. Not for nothing, with it focusing almost entirely on dwarves and Region. Yeah, I just have to say I would agree. I think this is the strongest episode of the season, so possibly the strongest episode of the show so far, which is quite positive. I was a bit down on. Don't know whether that came across last week. I was a bit down on episode 4. Um, but this episode, because it focuses in on Anatar and Celebrimbor and the dwarves, which I think are the two strongest parts of this story, then it's done well. I mean, the Numenor, there were hints towards where we would want the Numenor story to be going. There was the Pharazôn bit right at the very beginning when he's sort of talking about Tolerasair, and we can just about see it. And I think perhaps the elves did this because they're taunting us with their long lives, etc. That is exactly the feel that we should be going to with the Numenorians, not this season 1 kind of approach of those elves coming over here taking our jobs. That's not the level we should be talking at. We should be talking at a whole lot more metaphysical and dreams of immortality. That's where we should be heading with the Numenor plot, and they started touching on that as well, so I was pleased with that. I think I've identified this as Commander Ray saying, I think I've identified one of the Numenorian Nazgul. Can you guess which backstabbing, shrine disgracing, downright awful person I'm talking about? Well, absolutely. We talked about him a moment ago. I'm 95% certain he's going to be a Nazgul, I have to say. Sauron's continual manipulations, putting Celebrimbor in a bind so he has to make more rings, is excellent writing, and the way they're telling the story through the crafting of each set of rings makes me okay with the deviation from the books as long as they finish strong. Your thoughts? Yes, so this is one of those things where I would agree. I'd absolutely agree. I kind of touched on this earlier. For me, I can forgive a lot with good writing. If they do it well, I can forgive them making changes. That Peter Jackson made huge changes to the lore in the Lord of the Rings, but that was a really well written script. So I'm very happy with this. The way I kind of view it is a bit like Wheel of Time, which we sort of keep an eye on this channel. I don't really cover the Wheel of Time, but I enjoy the Wheel of Time. Season 2 was a big step up from season 1, but I can remember thinking when I was watching season 2, the bits that I liked the most were the bits that actually they kind of made up for the show. Now, that probably would have got me in trouble with the Wheel of Time community with that, but the way that they did it was to build on what the books say, Robert Jordan's world, and do things in keeping with that, with the kind of the feel that they've got going on there, and that's what made those things work. And so if you invent new stuff within Tolkien's world, if the feel is right, if this feels like Tolkien, then fantastic. Very happy with that. And I think we've got a few things here. The Anatar Celebrimbor thing, definitely the feel is right. I think the elements of the dwarf storyline, as I've said, the feel is right. And the first hints that the Numenor story might be going the right way as well. So, if it feels like Tolkien, then I'm a lot more on board. Rana Mitra saying, yeah, the Numenor plot is slowly moving in the right direction with the theological divide completely. I wasn't 100% convinced by the shrine, but that's a complete digression. As I say, I can forgive quite a few things if I feel the feel is right. And Reflective Rambling saying, oh, shush, no, you just can't bear the heartbreak of a world without spirits. I mean, I think the Undying Lands would be a sadder place without a glass of red wine. Don't you agree? I would say so. Just having a quick flick through the chat. Auntie Slayer saying, just so I don't re-ask a question, are we jumping around or has it been mostly Lord of the Rings? So we're doing Lord of the Rings first, and then we'll get on to other stuff afterwards. Lady Sophia Valarion, greetings to you as well. And let's go to a question from Corvus Codex. Hi, Robert. Do you think the Rings of Power is rushing the onset of greed in the ring-bearing dwarves? Also, will all the 9 be Numenorian, or will some be from Middle-earth? Well, I've covered the 9 question already, but in terms of rushing the onset of greed in the ring-bearing dwarves, I've only had the 1 episode. I mean, I am a bit concerned, I have to say. One of the key things here is that the Rings of Power should not have a strong effect on the dwarves. Yes, it should increase their greed, but in Tolkien's stories, we've got, I mean, thousands of years before they dig so deep and so greedily that they disturb Durin's Bane. So that's a long time, and I hope they don't go down the route of making it look like the dwarves are as easily affected by the rings as humans are, because they shouldn't be. The dwarves, should their minds, I can't remember the exact quote from Tolkien, but their minds are hard to fathom, and so they just work in a different way. So yes, I'm assuming this is a plot-driven thing, the speed here, as much as anything else, because they are wanting, I mean, I don't entirely know what they're wanting, but this would create a lot more for them, a lot more dramatic tension if we have King Durin being very, very greedy. And we'll see where they go. At the moment, when you say, are they rushing the onset of greed in the ring-bearing dwarves? At the moment, we've only got one dwarf wearing a ring. So we'll wait and see. Let's come back to that one in future episodes. Random Mitra, thank you for pointing out. It's also the first episode where the words "King's Men" was used. Yeah, in the Numenor plot. This was steps in the right direction. I'm not saying I'm completely bought in yet, but it's definitely steps in the right direction. Martin S. Clearly, the elves from a man have far superior craftsmanship than Thranduil's elves, having dealt with Aula. Thranduil's father messed up in the last alliance. Galadriel gave an improved bow to Legolas. Yes. So the craftsmanship from the elves of the West is significantly better than those of the elves of Mirkwood. I mean, the impression I've got is that this is partly due to the fact that if you're an elf who's been there in the light of the two trees and you've been trained perhaps by Aula himself, then yes, of course, you're going to be very skillful and good at these kinds of things. But also, this is a deliberate. I think sort of students of sort of English history from 100 and more years ago will think an arts and crafts movement is probably the closest I can say here. With the elves of Greenwood, they are deliberately living in a way which is sort of back to basics rather than trying to create the sort of craft new things. We're not told that they've got these great smithies trying to create new magical technologies. They seem to enjoy life and want to be in there amongst the trees. So there's part of it is those elves over there have got greater knowledge, and part of it is that's because these ones over here have decided that they don't wish to go down that route. Commander Race saying so far King Durin is just greedy, otherwise he's being an all right guy. He even told his son he's proud of him. He did. He did. So my my concern is as much that so he's got the rings and he sees the rings as an opportunity to bring the other dwarf lords and basically turn them into vassals to him, which is quite a big thing. And yeah, so at the moment it's just sort of like slight red flags, little bells dinging, uh, and combine that with what we've seen from the trailers as to where this might be going. So at the moment, we're not full on there, but the suggestion is that's where we're going. And we've only got 3 episodes to go this season. Let's not forget. Andrew K saying this season with only a few episodes left seems not much narrative progression yet again. And then there's that 18 to 24-month break. The jumping around numerous arcs is tough to juggle. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with the general feel that I much preferred it when we had just things produced on an annual basis. Game of Thrones was always done on an annual basis, and nowadays things seem to be 2 years before they're there, which I can kind of understand for longer series with huge amounts of CGI and post production and stuff like that. But with just 8 episodes, then I don't know. I'm not in the industry, so I may be completely underestimating the time it takes to do things and why things take a lot longer nowadays than they used to. But yeah, if you have lots of different plot lines going in different directions, it makes it harder when you come back to try and pick up where everything was, rather than if you just have one very clear plot line heading all the way through. Auntie Slayer saying, I've been in a rut lately. Oh, the only constant is rewatching your streams and anxiously awaiting new ones. Thank you for bringing joy in a positive community where it's been hard to find it. Mods included. Oh, thank you. That's really special. And I will take this as an opportunity to thank the moderators. So yeah, being the positive community. If you're watching this live, the reason why this is a positive community there in the chat is because the moderators create a positive space, and that is, yes, zapping the occasional trolls or whatever, but also that means encouraging open debate and just checking in on people. So if you are there in the chat live, could you just show a bit of love to the moderators, because they are absolutely amazing humans. Thank you. And Reflective Rambling saying, in my opinion, the only saving grace is that in this case, it's not only 2-year wait and all dropped at once. Yeah, so I mean, I also prefer it when you get weekly release rather than everything at once. I was a little, just on a personal level, I was a little bit frustrated doing 3 in 1 to start with, but that's just me. I much prefer the weekly rollout of these things. Let's go to 444 saying, hi, Robert. George R. R. Martin many times, this is still a question about the Lord of the Rings, but we'll start with George R. R. Martin. George R. R. Martin's many times mentioned the butterfly effects from small changes made for adaptations, and I think that Rings of Power is a perfect example. This season is an improvement, but it's the series is occasionally boring, with the 2 most boring storylines from the previous season still continuing: the Harfoots and the Stranger and the Southlands. Second, the series relies heavily on constant scene and dialogues, remaining redoing scenes from Peter Jackson's films. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, they probably would consider them to be fun callbacks. Third, the biggest issue, in my opinion, is that all changes are made in the first season, because they're changes that are made in the first season, like Galadriel meeting Sauron in the middle of the ocean. There was a need to explain how it happened, or because they made elven rings first, and Celebrimbor still needed to help make more rings, so Galadriel couldn't tell anyone in Eregion. So my questions are changes from the first season going too far as to make it possible to be an even better show, and only some improvements are possible? Well, yeah, this is an interesting one. I've talked about the butterfly effects in Rings of Power a few times last week, because they were very obvious last week, I thought. And as you say, one of the key things is if you change the order in which the rings are made, this means that we know that Sauron is out there. Galadriel knows that Sauron is out there, so you have to then go through, well, how do we make sure that people, particularly Celebrimbor, are unaware that Sauron's out there? Well, we have to make her, I thought at the time, inexplicably not tell him. I assume that was her pride, not wishing to say it. And then you have to come up with some way why messages can't come when she's gone all the way over to Linden, why messages can't get through. That means you have to create Barrow Wights, who should not be there at that moment in time. So you get all of these other things, the knock-on effects of all of this going on. It is possible to pull these things with good writing. I think many things are possible to pull this back. You could get past, where Sauron was at the beginning, how he got to be on that raft. We've kind of explained all of that bit now. Once all the rings are forged, and the one ring has been forged, then we can move on with the situation, and they've been distributed. Then we can basically start again on that plot line. So it is entirely possible, if you write it well, to bring everything back in again. And the butterfly effects stopped. I don't know the extent to which they're going to be doing that. But yeah, I mean, I have hope. I mean, you can't watch a Tolkien adaptation and not have hope. But I think that uh, the signals we've got from this last episode were positive about Numenor, about the Celebrimbor Anatar plot, and things like that. Lunar Cascade, have a specific number of seasons been guaranteed for the Rings of Power? Are costs a part of the reason for the delayed seasons? We've been told this is a 5-season arc. That is the basis on which the showrunners were hired, and they are writing the show on the basis that this is a 5-season arc. That we are still operating on the basis of they are providing green light for each season as we go along. Now, that means that, I mean, obviously we've had 2 seasons. We're already talking about season 3 in terms of writing and things like that. So I think that's pretty clearly going to go ahead. I think it would take quite a lot for this not to go the full 5 seasons, in my view. And for those who kind of like watch ratings and critical reviews and things like that, we always have to remember with Amazon, their success criteria are not the same as HBO's. With HBO, broadly speaking, they're looking at how many people are watching our TV show. Is it winning awards? Those are the things they care about. Are we making good TV? Are lots of people watching this TV? If lots of people watch it, then they get to sell their more expensive advertising slots. So that's all they really care about. Amazon, I'm sure, do care about those 2 things, but they care a lot more about people signing up to Amazon Prime, and in particular, which people are signing up to Amazon Prime, because they're not just they might be brought in by the Rings of Power, but once they're in, then they will be using Amazon Prime to be buying stuff off of Amazon. Also, are they selling associated other things here? The books, for example. I don't know what's happening at the moment, but certainly during season 1, the Lord of the Rings books went back up into the top 10 bestseller list. Amazon gets the vast majority of sales there, and so they're benefiting from that. So Amazon, and if you read what the executive of Amazon say, they're very clear in the way they say this has been a success. They say a cross-organization success, massive success. What they're meaning is that not just that we think this was a great TV show, this was good for the company as a whole. So, and I have no doubt that season 1 definitely was that. It's still early days. It seems that viewing figures are down a bit, probably for season 2, so we'll have to see how that plays through. But as long as they're still getting their new Prime subscribers, as long as they're still selling more books and things like that, I think they'll be very happy. As for our cost, part of the reason for delayed seasons, I think they are dealing with a reduced budget for future seasons. I don't think that's the cause of slow production. I think the delay between season 1 and 2 was because they were moving production from New Zealand to the UK. I think they've changed studios again within the UK. I think I saw that between seasons 2 and 3, which I've no idea why they're doing that. But my impression looking from the outside is that the reason why the Rings of Power takes so long between seasons is because firstly, they're not a well-oiled machine in the way HBO are in terms of creating TV shows. HBO have been doing this for decades now. They know how to create a TV show. Game of Thrones crew, a lot of the expertise that was theirs moved on into House of the Dragon. They can just sort of churn this stuff out, high quality, but they can churn this out. Amazon, that basically this was the biggest thing that they've done, and they're still a relatively new TV production studio, so they are kind of figuring things out as they go along. But also, they did want to make sure they had huge amounts of money, and they wanted to make sure that they got everything done to the standards they wanted. For example, I did an interview 2 years ago, a couple of interviews with Bear McCreary, who's the composer, who I think has done a fantastic job. And it was very clear that, from what he said, that the conditions he was given was very rare. He basically said, you know, give me 9 months or whatever it was, and I'll go away and I will score absolutely everything. We'll go through like scene by scene. We're going to have themes for every character. We're going to be telling the story through the way that these themes interact with and that, I'm sure, is partly how he operates as a whole. But it was very clear to me that him being given the freedom to do that was completely different to some other productions he may have worked on in the past, where he got something and got told, okay, you've got a week, give us some music for this. So that was very and I think that level of focus is on lots of different aspects of this production. Question from Martin S. It seems that legendary weapons and other equipment that just makes you more effective in combat are less corrupting than the broader powers of rings. Yeah, so, well, I think we need to understand the difference. So just having magic in something is not corrupting. Sauron was trying to create rings which would corrupt. So that's the intention of them. So just creating sort of a magic weapon or something will not in and of itself corrupt something. And if you go back to the Silmarillion, the Silmarils are sort of like the prototype for understanding rings of power, is that they are corrupting in and of themselves. They are this curious mixture of being very good and very corrupting. So I think that's it. It's because the intention is there. Ranabin Mitra saying, well said regarding Amazon's goals. Having previously worked there, I can 100% concur. Good. It's always nice to have backup from people who've worked there. Martin S saying, is it known about whether Morgoth's Iron Crown had any powers besides holding the Silmarils? In an older role-playing game, it does, but I'm talking Tolkien canon. No, we're not told. I mean, it's been a while since I was sort of investigating, but I can't remember that it specifically had any powers in and of itself. What he did was when he got the 3 Silmarils, he kind of had them embedded within it, and that it was them that sort of created the sort of the power and order of the Silmarils until they got pried out, basically. So no, I don't think that the crown itself, no. Deli's read it before, saying, yes, Auntie Slayer, these streams anchor my week, Robert. I struggle with mental health issues, but the amazing mods always make me feel welcome. Fellow chatters are now familiar, and I like it here. Well, that thank you. That means a lot. To have played my part in creating something which helps people not just chat about stuff they enjoy, but can be a safe place in the week for people, that means a lot. Thank you. And right, let's go to I think that's the Rings of Power questions I've got, but I've got some more Lord of the Rings questions. Lady von Strauss saying, would the ideal world what would the ideal world look like to Sauron after he's won? What happens next? We hear about what it would be like in a nebulous sense from the protagonists and the omniscient narrator, but what would it look like from his own perspective? What does it even mean to enslave the world? What would he do with it? Would he fall into an old one's slumber from sheer exhaustion? Well, I did a video called something like "What If Sauron Won," where I actually tried to tease out what this would mean. And yes, you're right. Most of what we hear is from people like Gandalf or Elrond saying, "Oh, and the world will be covered in darkness and it will be bad." Um, but we can kind of unpick a few of the things that he wants. So he loves order and he loves control. And so what we would have is the equivalent of an authoritarian, totalitarian state that allows no one the freedom and independence to do their own thing. Now, he would probably, based on what we've seen from the areas of Middle-earth that he does control, he would probably operate it on the basis that he was in overall charge, and then he would have sort of lieutenants who were sort of running different parts of his world. But there would be not much care for the environment. There would not much care for family life, freedoms, anything along those lines. From his perspective, the Valar have abandoned Middle-earth, and Middle-earth needs a firm hand, order, and he's the person who can provide that. And so he thinks that it's not that he thinks I'm doing great work. He doesn't think, I've woken up this morning, how do I kill lots of people? That's not what his motivations are. His motivations are to bring order to the world. Ms. Fox in Arda saying, this is a question from Mr. Fox. Hi there, Mr. Fox. Why did Sauron use the elves to make the Rings of Power to begin with? Did he need them? He had his own forge and he was teaching Celebrimbor. Couldn't he have made the Rings of Power and distributed them as Anatar? It is an interesting question. And I can answer on a couple of different levels. I think the first level is that you're right. He definitely knew how to forge rings of power on his own. He forged the One Ring on his own. He could theoretically have done that. But this is more about the distribution. I suspect more about the distribution than about the production of the rings, because his plan, forget where the Rings of Power has gone with this, his plan was to create these rings for the elf lords to have. That was the idea. And now what would he do? He makes them in Mordor, and then he emerges looking good. He's Anatar and says, "Hi, I've got some magic rings for you. Would anybody like a sweetie? Here's some magic rings." People are much less likely to trust somebody who just turns up on their doorstep and says, "Would you like a magic ring?" than someone who they've got to know and they've worked with. And this ring here, this was forged by Celebrimbor, the greatest smith of his age. That you might trust, not some mysterious stranger you've never met, however convincing. So I think that there's a distribution issue here. And the second thing, I think, is, did he need Celebrimbor? No, he could create things he could make Rings of Power on his own, but we shouldn't underestimate Celebrimbor's abilities. It may well be that Celebrimbor did add value to what was being made. Certainly it allowed access to Mithril that Sauron himself did not, and we know that at least one of the Rings of Power Galadriel's ring was mithril based. So he will have added value. Now, one of the frustrations in season 1 was Celebrimbor didn't, as much as he was built up as being a great craftsman, when he and Halbrand came together, it was Halbrand who was saying, "Oh, have you ever heard of alloys? We should try doing an alloy." That kind of thing, which seemed to imply that perhaps Celebrimbor wasn't as great as his reputation suggested, but he was. He absolutely was. He was a master craftsman, and as well as providing the access to mithril, he also will have added some great skill into the production of those rings. Gilio saying, "Are you aware of the stories of Shadow of Mordor and Shadows of War? If so, what are your thoughts on the lore and more specifically Celebrimbor?" Yeah, I mean, I played them a long time ago. I would have to brush up again on exactly what the lore changes. I can remember thinking this is not this is a long way from Tolkien's conception of Celebrimbor. Basically, if I remember rightly, some of the backstory or plot is along the lines of Celebrimbor as a kind of a shadow version who's kind of survived in a kind of an ethereal way, wants to forge another ring of power. Now, my take on Celebrimbor should be this tragic figure, but who sort of redeems himself at the end, and because he creates the 3 elven rings afterwards, and crucially, he gives them away, which is kind of supposed to make us think about Fëanor, his grandfather. He grew up in the shadow of Fëanor, who was the greatest elven craftsman ever, who created the 3 Silmarils, and he caused so many problems by the fact that he desperately wanted them back for himself. Yes, they were taken from him, and they shouldn't have been, but he made his sons swear these oaths, to never let anyone else have them, and that those oaths led to so many deaths and so much destruction because of the obsessiveness about having those 3 Silmarils back. And then Celebrimbor, after all of this, he emerges and he creates 3 equally wonderful works, these 3 elven rings, and he gives them away. And we're supposed to see this kind of opposite. And even though he had been duped by Sauron, he came through and produced some good in the end. And his fate should therefore be a tragic one. And so as I say, it's been a long time since I've sort of engaged with the lore of that, but of those video games. But the idea that having achieved that great character arc and a tragic but uplifting end, for him to then revert back to a bad place, I can remember not liking that. Let's go to Arandami Mitra saying, "Ian McKellen has said that this new movie by Andy Serkis will be 2 movies instead of 1, and that the scripts are pending for early 2025. Since clearly The Hunt for Gollum is not having content for 2 movies, what do you think we can see in these 2 movies? Would love the chat to be included in this as well. For me, in the 60 years between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, we can have Balin's mission to Moria, Erebor updates with Gimli, Glóin, Dain, Aragorn and his mum, probably Sauron's eye being formed in Barad-dûr." So for those who missed this story, this was yesterday, I think, maybe even today, I can't remember. Ian McKellen went on Morning TV. It was here in the UK. If you're in the UK, this was GMTV. I think it was. Ben Shepherd was asking some very morning TV easy questions. So this wasn't Ian McKellen being put on the spot about anything. He was literally there cuddling a puppy. So this was very soft questioning, and he was asked about being Gandalf, and then the interviewer says, is this just one film or are there going to be more? To which Ian McKellen says, oh, it's good. There's two. Andy Serkis is directing them. I've got the scripts, not read them, or the scripts are coming. I've not read the scripts yet. And he doesn't know any details about where the filming might be or anything, but basically, yes, he's been asked to be there. So this has led to, first of all, he probably shouldn't have said that, he's right, but we did know that they were thinking of doing more films than just that one that got announced. So this isn't huge news. I think a lot of people have run with the story of The Hunt for Gollum is going to be broken into two, in the same way they turned The Hobbit into 3 films. I think my instinct is the same as yours, Vanderbeer, that the way he said it isn't that this is one story broken into 2 parts. There would be 2 films about different things, but both with Gandalf in. Now, what might those films be? With the Hunt for Gollum, I did a video a little bit ago if you're interested in that and what that story is. But chat, I'll happily read out in a moment. What would you like another film of featuring Gandalf? They've decided to stick with Ian McKellen, which I'm happy with. He's obviously a lot older, but I think he can clearly still act. So I'm very happy for him to be keeping up his role as Gandalf. What would you want? Of the things that you suggest there, I think Balin's mission to Moria I would love. I think that would be fantastic, really good. You could have like Gandalf having a small part in that somewhere along the line. But yeah, the issue is all of these things. We've not got huge amounts. Tolkien didn't write huge amounts of extra stuff. He just wrote those 2 stories, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Other stuff we've got bits of information about, but not enough for a full script. There will have to be extra stuff written in there. Commander Ray saying just a set of mini stories with Gandalf helping people. Yeah, that'd be quite fun. I'll chat back in a little bit, see if there's any more suggestions there. William Schneider saying, hello, Robert. Just wanted to thank you. My Thursday drives home are the best of the week due to your live stream. Well, thank you very much. Drive safe. My question is about your last video. Speaking of the rings that were given to the dwarves, if the rings didn't have the effect that Sauron wanted over the dwarves, why didn't they play, they being the dwarves, why didn't they play a bigger part in the final battles for Middle-earth? Had they become so unaware or jaded in what was happening that they stayed out of it? Or did the ring perhaps not corrupt them but make them more uninterested in the plight of Middle-earth? Well, I think there's a few layers to this one. It didn't affect them in the way that Sauron wanted, in as much as he had no control over them anymore. But it did affect them in that it did make them greedier, more focused in on their mining. So the mines, the corporate mines of the dwarves were focused in on doing their thing, underground mining, getting more gold, whatever. Which meant that, yes, they were less focused on what was going on the surface. So I think that's answer number 1. Answer number 2 is that they had their own problems. We get Durin's Bane, who we know appears much later in the Third Age, but we also know that we get 4 other dwarf rings that got swallowed or burned by dragon attack. So a lot of which seems to imply that there were at least 4 dragon attacks on the dwarves, and that we just don't know the details of. So the dwarves were busy with other stuff. And a third answer is that the dwarves were involved. It's just that we don't really hear about it that much. So there were some dwarves who were involved in the last alliance of elves and men. Not a huge amount, but there were some dwarves there. And then when we get to the War of the Ring, the battles that were happening around the time of the Lord of the Rings, then there was a battle, the Battle of Dale, which is just outside the Lonely Mountain, just outside Erebor. The Easterlings came and attacked, and the men of Dale and the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain fought alongside each other. So they were involved. The other thing probably to point out is that we know, or that we talk about the 7 dwarf clans, tribes. They, at least 2 of them, who were based in the Blue Mountains, sort of the west end of Middle-earth, they basically died out. They got subsumed within the Longbeards, Durin's folk in Khazad-dûm. So it may well be that the same thing happened to some of the dwarves off in the east as well. What we don't have is, and dwarves don't have huge amounts of children. What we don't have is a dwarven nations spreading and growing. We actually seem to have a dwindling population of dwarves. So there are fewer of them. They're more focused on doing their mining, and they've got problems of their own. And actually, they did play a role. So those are the sort of the several different options we've got going on there. Let's go to Callie Summers saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope you're doing well." I am, thank you. Since Sauron was a Maiar serving Aule, who created the dwarves, is it more surprising or less that Sauron's rings didn't work well on the dwarves? Were they already closer in alignment, seeking an ordering of the world through innovation, so there was less effect to be had? Or is it more a you can't play a player, and their intrinsic connection to craftsmanship gave them an understanding of the nature of the rings in a way that lessened their effect? It seems less likely that Sauron simply didn't understand dwarves when they both share a deep connection to Aule. Well, I think it actually is that he didn't understand them. That these were not designed for dwarves is the first thing. The Rings of Power have gone down the route of making rings for dwarves. That's not what happened in the books. In the books, these were the 16, which became the 9 and the 7. The 16 were meant for the elves. So these were rings made for elves. But that plan didn't work. So this was plan B, trying to distribute them across to humans and dwarves. So they're not designed for dwarves, is the first thing. But what we're told, the reason why they weren't as effective is that the dwarves are just a bit different, and their minds are hard to fathom. They are made different to humans and elves. And yes, there's a connection between the dwarves and Aule and Sauron and Aule, but what the backstory for the dwarves is basically that Aule the smith, the Valar, he made the dwarves, and then Eru came and said, "Hang on a minute, I'm the one who does the making around here, and they're not actually going to have like souls, and they'll just be like automatons if you make them." And Aule's like, "Oh, okay, I didn't realize I was just wanted to make stuff. I hadn't realized I've overstepped." He's about to destroy them, and then Eru goes, "Hey, don't worry about it. I'm giving them life. I'm giving them souls, but they have to like go to sleep and wait until the elves are coming. They can't be first because they have to be at their place in in the sort of the order of things. And so Aula accepts that, distributes the dwarves around Middle-earth. They appear a bit later, and this was all largely done in secret. And so none of the other Valar knew what was going on. He wasn't telling any of his, as far as we can tell, Aula didn't tell any of his attendants, his Maya. It was a secret even to his wife until he kind of admitted it. So it's not as if Sauron knew what Aula did to create these. It's to create the dwarves. It's not as if Sauron had any particular experience of dealing with dwarves, as far as we can tell, in the first age. So, and the rings they were given weren't designed for dwarves, so it actually kind of makes sense that this wouldn't work quite so well. We're told that basically humans are much more power hungry, and their willpower is lower, so that's why you could use the ones that the elves have got. And he knew about humans. He understood humans. He'd been dealing with humans all this time. And Martin S asking if the Forodwaith, is it north of the polar circle, do you think? I mean, yes, is my best guess. It's certainly very far north, and icy. So you could probably work it out with these things. Middle-earth is our world in a different stage of imagination, is the way that Tolkien described it. But he did sometimes, just to try and help, I think, to help himself ground things as much as to help us ground things, is he would sort of say, oh yes, so the Shire is at about the same latitude as Oxford in our world, so we kind of understand what the climate's like. And so you could probably then work out how far north things like the Forodwaith are. My instinct is probably yes, though. Rabbi Mitra asking if I could share my thoughts on MJ's chat just above. Brilliant info about Gandalf possibly being there in the Second Age. Let me have a look. MJ saying, in the final year of Tolkien's life, in an essay discussing Glorfindel's reincarnation, Tolkien describes his relation to Gandalf and mentions what Gandalf was doing in the Second Age. I would be interested in reading that. I don't know that off the top of my head. And as always with these things, I have gaps in my knowledge, and there are some things, and what I do not wish to do is give you half bits of information. So yeah, if there's something, link it down. I'll have a look in the comments afterwards. But if there's something there that I think people would be interested in hearing about, then I will happily come back to it next week. Talking of which, in case you're coming into this live stream part way through, what I've decided to do from next week, we're going to head back to doing the more deep dive type live streams, looking at a specific subject, and then I'll do that for the first half of the live stream, and then the second half I will do Rings of Power stuff, because I want to give people the opportunity to talk about the Rings of Power, ask questions about the Rings of Power, but I also appreciate, first of all, not everyone's interested in the Rings of Power, but secondly, it's not everyone has seen that episode. It gets my time early in the morning issued the episode, and then my time is late in the evening. Now, not everyone in that period of time has had a chance to see the show, so without changing my live stream times around, then this is the best I've come up with. Okay. Let's go to A Song of Ice and Fire questions. Actually, while I'm at a pause, Patrons, thank you. I always try and say thank you at some point in my live stream. I can't do what I do without your support, so I hugely appreciate it. If you do want to support this channel, Patreon is the best way to do it. There's a link down in the description. You just sort of click through, and there's a whole load of stuff there. You get early access to audio and scripts and things like that as well. Anyway, a Song of Ice and Fire questions. Lady Von Strauss, is the difference between Valyrian steel and Castleforge steel basically the same difference as between Crucible steel and iron weapons, i.e. high temperatures? Or is there something truly magical about Valyrian steel? Is the secret in the source? Does somebody have to die in order to make it special, or was that just for Lightbringer? Okay, so this is actually, I will just go straight to what George R. R. Martin has said on the subject, and then I'll sort of talk a little bit around it, because he was asked this a long time ago. He was asked about this. He said this: the closest real life analog is Damascus steel. Now, Damascus steel, for those who don't know, and there's always somebody who's more expert on these things in the chat. Feel free to do a better version of what I'm about to say and drop it into the chat. I'll happily read it out. Damascus steel was a technology which was kept very secret, which is basically, yes, done in a crucible. You get stronger, sharper steel. It had a distinctive kind of it felt a bit like Valyrian steel, a ripple effect looking on it. But that technology was lost. And so Damascus steel was in great demand, but nobody knew how to make new things from it. But George R. Martin says the closest real-life analog is Damascus steel, but Valyrian steel is a fantasy metal, which means it has magical characteristics, and magic plays a role in its forging. So he makes clear elsewhere. So Valyrian steel, it's not a naturally occurring thing. You don't dig up Valyrian steel. There's a process to make Valyrian steel, and the process to make it is forging, but it's also, there's a magical element there as well. We don't know all the details of this, but this being because we haven't been told all the details of it, the secret has been lost. In world, the secret to forging new Valyrian steel has been lost. Some people know how to manipulate it, so you can reforge stuff. That's what happened with Ice, Ned Stark's sword, which got reforged into two smaller swords. Tobbo Mott is the guy who did that. But in terms of making it, as this is Valyrian, the clear implication is this is fire and blood are involved. The furnace in some way, and also some kind of sacrifice. So we don't know all of the detail. But that there is definitely magic going on in its creation. Rassler, in George's post, this is the, if you remember last week, we talked quite a bit about George R. R. Martin did a blog post that he put up and then he took back down again quite quickly, where he talked about toxic butterfly effect, and basically unhappiness with some elements of what was going on with a House of the Dragon. And he raised the possibility of Jaehaera Jaehaera being the daughter of King Aegon and Helena, taking Maelor's place, Maelor being the son that they had but isn't on the show, taking Maelor's place at Bitterbridge, but quickly dismissed it because of her future role in marrying Aegon III and tying the two lines together. But since the show will most likely not show the regency at its aftermath, and Jaehaera's marriage is short-lived and doesn't produce any heirs, do you think the show could have her dying at Bitterbridge, or is her role joining the lines together, no matter how brief, too important even for show-only viewers? This is one of the things that George R. R. Martin, when he was going through the butterfly effect, he said, okay, so we don't have Maelor, which means that made in his mind what happened with Blood and Cheese less effective on the screen than it was in the book. Also, he says that this means that we don't get Bitterbridge, which is basically they try to spirit Jaehaera out of King's Landing and then away down. I think they were going to Old Town. Along the way, with a King's Guard guarding little child, 2-year-old child, they get to Bitterbridge, this town, halfway there, and then the mob fall on them. Baby dies tragically and quite horrifically. Helena then is grief struck, and spoilers, by the way, is grief struck, and she then commits suicide. And he basically says, okay, so there's a ripple effect, a butterfly effect here, that so then Bitterbridge won't happen, and that means that Helena won't do what she did, and that means that there won't be riots in King's Landing, because there were riots in King's Landing following that, because there was a rumour that actually Rhaenyra had killed her. And those riots eventually led up to the storming of the Dragon Pit, and that is massively important. But this is all down to if you don't have Maelor. Now, he then goes through, well, could you get around this by having Jaehaera be the baby at Bitterbridge? Well, no, because she's needed later for other things. My take is, yeah, I think they probably will that they will keep her alive until the end. They'll stick with what happens in the book, which is that she goes down to Storm's End and survives. And at the end of the show, they'll end it roughly, I think, somewhere around the end of the Hour of the Wolf. And they will say, okay, so Aegon the Third, we need to unite the kingdom. Aegon the Third here, we've got Jaehaera, they're only kids, but we should bring them together. So bring the two sides together, everyone will be happy at the end. So I think it's a good, not only is it important potentially going forward into the Regency, but I think it's a good way to round off the end of the story. I kind of tend to the view, though, which I think I said last week, that this is not crediting the showrunners and writers with the imagination to come up with another way of doing things. So if your concern is not having what happens at Bitterbridge because you think that's a really important thing, then I personally think they would probably happily not show that. But if you think that that's important because of the impact it has on Helena, you could create another thing that has an impact on Helena, particularly given that with Helena, they've created this extra element to her, the dragon dreaming element, which means she can see a lot more of the future. And so I think you can easily write a way in which that might cause her to be doing things. Which isn't to say the butterfly effect's not important, because you then need to make sure that the thing that you do to step in doesn't itself have butterfly effects going forward. April May saying Vymond is reading letters before he gives them to anyone. So is Pylos. Are or who or what letters or information is being kept from the lords? I don't know. Off the top of my head, I've not thought about this. This is one of those things. I will, if it's okay with you, I will come back next week with an answer on this one. So do remind me if I don't next week. So yeah, happy to answer that one. I will get back to you next week. Lady Von Strauss asking if I'll be doing that Helena video soon. I can't remember exactly which Helena video, but I was talking about going through her wall, her kind of like vision wall. Yeah, I'll try to do that this week. Thank you for reminding me. Antonio Panzetta saying, hello, Robert. I'm sorry if this has been asked before, but I'm a new patron. Well, welcome, first of all, to Patreon. Keep in mind, I loved House of the Dragon Season 2. I also did, just for the record. I think this is the thing I always have to sort of put alongside my absolute respect for George R. R. Martin and his views and his care for how his creation is put on screen. What was put on screen in season 2, I really enjoyed. I thought it was a really good season. Not perfect, but a good season. With George R. R. Martin being somewhat upset about some of the changes in House of the Dragon, what are the actual butterfly effect consequences that you can see? The only major law change I've heard about is Maelor being absent. I'm reading through A Song of Ice and Fire for the first time and haven't read the Dance of the Dragons section in Fire and Blood yet. What major changes have there been so far, and what could the consequences be? Well, there's a lot of changes. The first thing, if you've not read Fire and Blood, is just to be clear that the way George R. R. Martin writes it is as an in-world history book, which does not always say exactly what happened and why. It often gives a number of different possibilities. So, for example, in the Dance of the Dragons, he's got 3 different sources that he goes to. We've got Mushroom, who I'm making a video about at the moment, who's court jester, quite sensationalist and salacious in a lot of what he says. We've got Septon Eustace, who is sort of the opposite, and then you've got he uses Monken as well, who did another history book based on some other people's writings, and so he kind of picks these at different times. Something happens and says, well, Septon Eustace says this happened, and then Mushroom says this happened. Maybe it was somewhere in the middle. So Fire and Blood does not present a single historical timeline. We're invited to choose and decide what we think is the most likely, or to hold up our hands and say, well, we simply do not know. That's it. If you're asking about major changes so far, there have been quite a few. I think they've done well, but there have been quite a few. The other one that George R. R. Martin has opined on a few weeks earlier in his blog post is roaming dragons, and this is. He did a blog post basically on dragon law, and he said his dragons do not roam. Unless they're ridden somewhere or there's some extra special circumstances, they stay where they are. They have kind of they nest. They have a lair. They'll hunt around the local area. They're not moving to a new area. And he said this is important. Not least because if you go way back in time, at the Doom of Valyria, that killed 99% of the dragons because the dragons don't roam. They stay put. And so the only dragons who weren't caught up in the Doom of Valyria were dragons that had been flown elsewhere, which limits the number hugely. And if that hadn't been the case, if dragons could roam, then the Doom of Valyria wouldn't have destroyed most of the dragons. So that's his point there, but he was tying this into House of the Dragon, where we do have a roaming dragon who is Sheepstealer, who has roamed over to the Vale, and that's the clear implication from what we saw in season 2 of House of the Dragon is that the person who's going to or who has found Sheepstealer and will then bond with Sheepstealer is Rhaena, which removes a character called Nettles, who is one of the dragon seeds in the book, and that creates a completely different way of seeing what happens later, which is that Damon and Nettles in the book get very close. This would then actually turn into a kind of a father-daughter bonding session between Damon and Rhaena, which would add a different layer. But in the book, Rhaena appears after the dance suddenly on a new newly hatched dragon called Morning, which flies over King's Landing, fills everyone with this thought of, okay, we thought all the dragons were dead or dying because of the dance, but here's another one. The Targaryens will be back soon with lots of dragons. So that was kind of a thematically important thing. I could imagine that that's what George R. R. Martin's mind is going to. That butterfly effects of dragons roaming here for this story means that we don't have that moment with Rhaena and the dragon Morning. So that's probably the biggest thing that he's thinking of. There's also a few other things in terms of changes. A lot of characters have been aged up, so a lot of the kids are a lot older. So Baela, for example, is aged up, meaning that she can now be involved in a lot more dragon fights and things like that. So that has led to a slight change. The balance of power has felt a little bit different in the show than it was in the books, and they had to keep on coming up with reasons why Team Black weren't going on the attack. This is because Rhaenyra didn't want to. She was holding back from attacking all of that time because she has a lot more adult and grown-up dragon riders on the TV show. There's also another bit of aging up they did was Rhaenyra to Alicent, creating that strong friendship. That's not there in the book. In the book, there's a 9-year age gap when Alicent marries Viserys. She's 18. Rhaenyra's just 9. They're not besties. This is much more a stepmother, stepdaughter situation going on, and they never. It's okay to start with, but they never really get on. So the way that the TV show has evolved has to have those two characters and their relationship be the heart of everything, which has meant when we get these meetings, those couple of meetings we had in season 2, they're not in the book because the idea of those two meeting each other and having a polite little chat and agreeing things between themselves, that just would not have happened in the story. So that has to, once you've established that, that will affect everything going forward and how those two characters react going forward. They've also, I mean, I'll just, as I said, there have been a lot of changes. But 2 more I'll just raise. The first is that there's a lot more in the TV shows, gone a lot more to do with misunderstandings and accidents have caused these things, rather than in the book. It seems very clear that the war was caused by the two sides who really hate each other, and in particular Team Green, who launched a coup. The TV show added in Alicent misunderstanding Viserys's dying words and thinking that Viserys wanted Aegon to be on the throne. That kind of thing, that's not at all in book. And then the final thing is Harrenhal being quite a spooky dooky and part of the Weirwood network. I think that's a brilliant addition. But that's, again, not in the book. Martin S. saying, I drove past the polar circle in a southern direction in Norway roughly 6 hours ago, and seeing Forodwaith in Rings of Power made me draw a connection. Yep, absolutely. I can understand that. Clash Ballerina, are the comics canon? Because I find it very interesting. Varys is drawn with purple eyes. I mean, canon within George R. R. Martin's world, it sort of evolved. I would call it semi-canon is where it is. The only actual book canon is the books. That's all the canon we have. Book canon. George R. R. Martin was, when he did that interview, whenever it was, with History of Westeros, he was very clear. He thought there were 2 canons: book canon, show canon, and they're separate things. So there are graphic novels, basically, of the books and the Duncan Egg stories. As I understand it, the way that operated was that the writer and the artist, they sort of made the version, which necessarily has to be a huge cut down from the book because the books are massive, and to create that in graphic novel style requires cutting out a huge amount, and then the kind of the drafts did go to George R. R. Martin, and then he kind of like says, a couple of suggests a few changes and things like that, so they make some changes and then that goes out. So he's not in active involvement in that, but he can sort of veto things and stuff like that. One interesting thing, which is, if you've not come, I talked about this like a few times a few years ago, but if you've got the graphic novels there for book one, Game of Thrones, with the person who was the artist, I think, got the feedback from George R. R. Martin about, and they were vague about this, but it's a fun game you can play. He said that there was one scene that he specifically asked for them to include that was not in their draft, that felt like a completely insignificant scene, and a bit of dialogue. But he said he wanted that there because it would be important for the final scene in the book, which is really intriguing. And the best theory I've heard, Bookshelf Stud, who long-time member of the A Song of Ice and Fire community, his working theory, having looked at the graphic novel, is that the scene which was added in that George R. R. Martin asked was and you probably didn't even notice it in the book, but there's a bit where Benjen and John at the feast, basically when King Robert's there right early on, they're talking, and then Ghost is silent, and Benjen says, when you're north of the wall, you can hear the direwolves crying or calling out. And it's just a few extra panels. But if you were doing a completely condensed version of a Game of Thrones, you would not have included that. And so his theory, which I like a lot, is that must be the bit that George R. R. Martin said, could you just add this in? Because it's going to link across to what happens at the very end. And what does that mean for the very end? Well, if Jon Snow does go north of the wall, and then what if, like, one of the last lines is the direwolves, he could hear the direwolves calling out to him as he rode into the north, and Ghost answered them. That would be a really cool little way to end it, and would link back across to that conversation at the beginning. Complete digression, but I find that quite fascinating. But the short answer: are the comics canon? Semi-canon in my mind. Sword of the Morning, Robert. Do you expect Winds of Winter or more Duncan Egg first? I know you will hate this question. Sorry. Yeah, I do hate that question, but I've got a good roundabout way of addressing this, because there's another, after that blog post he did a week or so ago, which got taken down. He did two others in the same day. One of them was about I can't remember anyway, but American football teams or something. So his blog, incidentally, it's called Not a Blog. You can just Google it, and it's quite varied. It's not much about the Winds of Winter, to be honest. He does name check it every now and then, because obviously he knows that's what most people there are going to see what he says. But he talks about all different aspects of his life on there. But there was a throwaway comment in the second blog post, which kind of built on what we've learned, I think, recently, is that he's in a bad place right now in himself. He's not good. His best friend died. He's really struggled to cope with that. He's not been sleeping well, and he's not finding it easy to write at the moment. We kind of know these things. It's still sad. I think if we can all kind of go easy on him for a little while, I think that would probably help him out a little bit, so he doesn't feel like we're on his back. He did mention in passing that he said he has got some writing done. He said he's done a few pages of The Winds of Winter and a few pages of Blood and Fire, which is the first official confirmation of what I've long suspected will happen, which Blood and Fire being Fire and Blood Part 2. And so the telling of the Targaryen story from the Regency, just after the Dance of the Dragons, all the way through, presumably right up to Robert's Rebellion and the fall of the Mad King. Now, I've long suspected he finds that easier to do, Fire and Blood. If you remember Fire and Blood Part 1, he produced that when we were all thinking, oh, he should be now writing The Winds of Winter. And then suddenly it's like, oh, guys, I've got a whole book. Here's 700 and something page book, History of the Targaryens, Part 1. Enjoy. And it was like, yes, thank you, George. Love having new stuff from you. But you just read a 750 page book rather than The Winds of Winter. It was less like, okay, swings and roundabouts. I have a feeling that may happen again. He finds it easier to write that kind of thing than the Winds of Winter. So it would not surprise me if we get that. As for Duncan Egg, last time he's mentioned it, he will write more Duncan Egg after he's finished The Winds of Winter. But if he gets to a point where if the Duncan Egg TV show is a hit, and if they produce them as they might do, because there's only short stories, only like 6 episodes per season, no big dragon CGI effects to be done, they could do them on an annual basis, and it would make more sense, as clearly Egg is quite young and will, age relatively quickly, particularly if you're having a 2-year turnaround. Then for each season. So I suspect they might make that an annual thing, which means that we could just be 4 years or so away from running out of Duncan Egg stories. And I don't think he will want to allow that to happen. I think he would, given the fact that he's got one half written already, it wouldn't surprise me, even if he's not finished The Winds of Winter, if we get another one. So that was probably a slightly longer answer to that question than you were expecting, but because we've got a little bit more information from him. Auntie Slayer saying, how do you think the Red Priests will impact the rest of the story? Their influence on people of power continues to grow. Victarion buying in is telling. It can persuade people you'd never expect if desperate enough. So the Red Priests... this is going to be bigger than people think, is my kind of understanding. They have decided, the Temple of the Red Gods, worshippers of R'hllor, the powers that be there have decided that Dany is Azor Ahai reborn. And that is massive, because their entire religion is based around the fact that there are 2 gods. Their god who they worship and the great other, this horrible god who they're going to have a showdown between these 2 gods. This is apocalyptic end time kind of feeling. And the hero is going to be Dany. And is going to be Azor Ahai reborn, and they've decided that's Dany. So this means that it's not just they might send a priest here or there. They're going to mobilize everything to get behind her. We've seen Moqorro. They've sent Moqorro to her first. But when Tyrion goes in Volantis, he passes by or through the sort of the outer courts of their main temple there. And there's the guy preaching, the high priest is preaching atop this big pillar. and it's an amazing spectacle. There's like seemingly magical fireworks and things going on as he's doing this, and he is whipping the people up into a frenzy. The end of the world is nigh. Um, Thousands, tens of thousands of the slaves basically in Valantis are all there having somebody whipping them up into this frenzy. um, Tyrion says it felt like King's Landing did just before the riot. And so what we've got here is the Red Priests and the Faith are based all across the Free Cities. There's going to be this massive sudden uprising across Essos. And particularly, it may well be timed for when Dany comes across. She'll have to go past Volantis with her fleet in order to get to Westeros. And uh, they the rebellion, the civil uprising may well be timed for that. So expect when she goes, other people to be following her. The Red Priests are going to be coming across. Everybody's going to be there backing her up. And this is really important visually because whereas on the TV show, the impression very much here she is, she's coming back to claim the throne, which was rightfully hers. She is not going to appear like a Westerosi person at all. She is going to come with. She's never set foot on the mainland of Westeros, and she's going to be arriving with an army of unsullied Dothrakis, or the Dothraki nation, the foreign religion, the priests of a foreign religion whipped up into a frenzy to support her, foreign sellsword companies. This is going to feel like a foreign invasion of Westeros, all coming across at the same time, some filled with religious zeal, some who've been paid to be coming along, some who are following her personally because they believe in her personally. This is going to be huge and massive, and it's the Red Priests are not just going to be playing a bit part. Well, it's not just going to be Melisandre wandering around with occasional bits from the Thoros of Myr. There's going to be a lot of Red Priests going on. Okay. Lady Forsyth saying, "Do I feel like pointing out how odd a love triangle between Arya, Tyrion, and Jon would have been?" Yeah, this was in George R. R. Martin's original plan. That was part of the original plan. A love triangle between Arya, Tyrion, and Jon. Um, yeah, very odd. Uh, One can assume that the characters would have been slightly different, although the names of the characters is one of the things which is noticeable. A lot of people look at that. I'm going off in digressions a lot today. Apologies, but with if the video I just released, I think yesterday, with his original plan, there's the letter that he wrote off to, I think it was his agent, saying, "Here's my idea for this high fantasy trilogy." A lot of people focus on that letter, which I narrated, by the way, over on Patreon. So if you're a patron, then you go and have a look if you want, or have a listen if you want to know the actual text of what he wrote. A lot of people focus in there on the differences, and there are quite a few of them. Some of them are quite stark, pun intended. But what I find fascinating, the things that have clearly stayed the same, all of the character names are exactly the same. He's not changed them at all, which does make you wonder the extent to which, given the fact he wants a character name to reflect the character in his mind, does that mean that their characters, the characters of those people, are the same? Some of them are clearly slightly different. Jamie seems to be a very different character. For example, he claims the Iron Throne. I think the phrase was with the simple expedient of killing everybody else who was ahead of him in the line of succession and blaming it on Tyrion. So he seems like a very different character. But does that mean that all the characters are going to be very different? I don't know. Andrew Kay saying, if George R. R. Martin is able to focus on writing Dunk and Egg, I suspect, given the length and tone of them, he could write those quite quickly. Yeah, I agree. And so it wouldn't surprise me if we get some Dunk and Egg. But I think the Blood and Fire seems to be the one that he's more interested in right now. And you're also pointing out, Andrew Kay, that with Fire and Blood, this is part one, he did have the World of Ice and Fire and some Dance of the Dragons novellas to borrow, expand on. Sequels should take longer. Yeah, I agree. There was, so the Fire and Blood was based on the World of Ice and Fire, plus there's 3 novellas we had. There's the Princess and the Queen, the Rogue Prince, and also the Sons of the Dragon, which is basically Aegon's 2 sons. So he had various bits, but he wrote large chunks, particularly of like the Charis stuff, the Regency, all of those kinds of things. He wrote about from scratch. So yeah, he will still have a basis from the World of Ice and Fire. Will provide a basis for him. But yeah, he's not got those big chunks of text already there. Sword of the Morning. I'm curious, Robert, if the Winds of Winter dropped, would you read it fully, then take notes, or take notes as you went along? How would you digest it? I mean, I've thought about this a huge amount. Think I think I would. Well, in my mind, I've already plotted this out. I would book myself like an Airbnb or a hotel room or something just for 2 or 3 days, where I don't have to worry about anything else in the world, and I will just read. And the way I've always, I say always, but the way I've stumbled upon to get the best understanding of the plot as a whole for George R. R. Martin is chapter by chapter. So what I would probably do is read a chapter, because he writes each chapter like he structures it as a mini short story. You almost all of his chapters, you have your starting point, you have some kind of conflict or problem, and then by the end of it, you get a resolution. Now, that may be a physical thing that actually happens, or it may be a bit of character development, but that arc happens for each chapter, most chapters, and also each character within a book. So I would probably read a chapter, then scribble down a few notes, and then read the next chapter, then scribble down a few notes. And I would, once I've read it through, my second go through would be listening to the audiobook, because that always gives you a slightly different perspective. Luna Cascade, have the phrase always been so? As far as we can tell, yes. We get in the third Duncan Egg book, we do get, it's very amusing, we get little Walder Frey, and the way Dunk describes him, snotty nosed and whiny and things like that, it's great fun. But yes, they do appear to have largely always been like that. Relax like a cat. Are George R. R. Martin's dragons ever used to transport armies? What, on their back? No. I mean, they can get quite big, but we do get some, like Raina took flights with like 3 friends, I think, on Dreamfire. So you do. We have got times where more than one person's on a dragon back, but transporting armies, no. Milky Way saying, hello, Robert. I like your idea that Jon Snow's real name is actually Aegon, as this would echo June. Paul had 2 sons named Leto. Rhaegar had 2 sons named Aegon. Yeah, I'd not really thought about that, but yeah, that's an interesting observation. Thank you. Caius Ballerina. picking up a question from Ranabir Mitra. I love it when you do this. Thank you. I know you do this quite a lot, actually, Kai's Bellerin, picking up questions for other people in the chat. It's very kind. The recent video around Renly's Peach had such brilliant animation. Who was the animation by, and can they be commissioned? Well, I do have an editor to do these things. It's way beyond my ability. I'm very happy to, if you get in contact, I'm very happy to see if they're interested in more commissions. So yeah, I thought that was a really good one as well, actually, I have to say. Question from Mr. Worldwide. Hi, Robert. It's been a while since I've been able to catch a live stream, so I'm excited to tune in for this one. Well, welcome. My question is about the legend himself, Strong Belwas. What do you think the future holds for him? He seems to be loyal and is certainly a capable fighter, but is there any doubt about his loyalty to Daenerys? Is there a chance that down the line Illyrio tries to make him turn against his queen to support Fagon? This is an interesting one. So, for the Strong Belwas is a book-only character, and we meet him when you remember when Sir Barristan heads across to find Dany, and when he goes across, he's first of all he's sort of in disguise. Now, on the TV show, they basically said he just went and found her himself and then offered his services. In the book, he is sent, so he ends up with Illyrio, falls in with Illyrio, and he is sent by Illyrio Mopatis along with Strong Belwas with 3 ships to go and get Dany and bring her back to Illyrio, basically. So we get Sir Barristan, who is there as a rather oddly old squire for Strong Belwas, who used to fight in the fighting pits of Meereen. Big guy, very strong fighter. I find him quite a fun and amusing character to have around. And he comes across as very loyal, very straightforward as a character. Who to whom is he loyal is a really interesting question. So his owner appears to be Illyrio at the moment, but in Meereen, he's been put there on the whatever Sir Barristan called it, their council, ruling council in Daenerys' absence, and Sir Barristan trusts Strong Belwas. The working assumption is that when Dany gets back, then he'll just kind of slot in there as her sort of personal bodyguard, which she was largely acting as before, and sort of part guide to the customs of Meereen, and he would accompany her as she heads over to Westeros. The question, though, is what might happen if Illyrio decides that he actually wants to stop Dany in some way or intervene in some way with Dany, because Illyrio clearly is backing Fagon, who by this point will probably be established in Westeros, probably ruling from King's Landing, and then Dany will arrive. There are already questions, we don't need to go into all of this, with Sir Barristan, who is a bit of a Rhaegar fanboy, and if he finds out, as he will at some point quite soon, Tyrion may well tell him. If Tyrion doesn't tell him, then he will discover when they get to Westeros that we get this guy, Fagon, who is claiming to be Aegon, Rhaegar's son, which would make him, depending on which way you interpret it, make him the rightful heir to the Seven Kingdoms. And Sir Barristan is a man of honour who will think, well, I should go be supporting whoever is the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, because I swore to the Targaryens, and I should probably. This is why he went and tried to find Dany, because he thought she was the only Targaryen left. If he finds someone who he thinks has got a better claim and seems to be quite a good candidate, he may well, by some point in the Winds of Winter, George R. R. Martin has basically confirmed she is going down a darker path in the next book, at least, and so Sebastian may see things that he doesn't completely agree with. So there's already a question whether he might swap sides. Illyrio, if Strong Belarus does still feel that he follows Illyrio, then Illyrio may pull him off as well, and you could have this. It's not really a mini rebellion, but you could have some of Dany's inner circle shifting sides right at a really awkward moment. Let's go to Kelly Summers, about George R. R. Martin's writing. You've answered this before, but I wonder if a couple of extra years of the Winds of Winter being on the horizon have adjusted your take. Might we always be 2+ books away from the end of the series as the tale grows in the telling? The Winds of Winter is apparently already so big that it will need to be bound in 2 volumes. Calling it one book feels like a technicality at that point. And so we're now effectively at least 3 books away from the end. Could George go for the meta-narrative that a dream of spring will forever be a dream, and that moves further away as we draw closer? I don't think he's going to go for that. But in terms of size, the Winds of Winter, the last time we got a sort of a page update from him, which was a couple of years ago now, he said he'd done, I think it was about 1,200 pages, 1,200 pages, and that was about 75% of the way through. He expected, which means that we're looking at about 1,600 pages for The Winds of Winter, which is bigger than any of the other books we've got so far. Almost certainly will need to be published in at least 2 volumes. They might even try and do 3, milk it for all it's worth. Once we're done with that, though, this is when the real questions start arising for me, because taking Dany's story just in isolation from everything else, where we're expecting her Winds of Winter storyline, plotline to take her is she's in the Dothraki Sea, dealing with the Dothraki, then coming back to Meereen, and then working her way across the south of Essos, stopping off at a few places before eventually arriving at Dragonstone, Westeros, wherever. The kind of feel that we've sort of imagined is, I think it was the end of season 5 of Game of Thrones, when she's there with her fleet sailing over towards Westeros. That's the kind of feel that we've got, which means that you then have to stop and think, well, what else has to happen in her story? And I think the answer is quite a lot. If you go back to that original, I was talking about this a bit ago, that original plan that George R. R. Martin had, which, yes, it's changed around a lot, but at a high level, he said there's 3 existential threats. Book 1 is the civil war in Westeros, Starks and Lannisters. Book 2 is Dany's invasion. Book 3 is the others attacking. And where we will be at the end of the Winds of Winter is just before Dany attacks. So on his original plan, we're actually really only finishing book 1, which is quite a dispiriting thought when you go down that route, because what story do we need from her in A Dream of Spring? She arrives in King's Landing. She'll have to deal with Fagon. She'll then presumably have to meet John at some point. Then what she's going to go up and face the others herself if it matches roughly what happens with in terms of order of events with the TV show. Then she's going to be sort of heading back down again. Then we've got another confrontation. That feels to me a lot more than one book. So I have a feeling that A Dream of Spring could easily split down and could easily be longer than The Winds of Winter. Lunar Cascade. If George R. R. Martin doesn't finish A Song of Ice and Fire, do you think he would allow someone else to finish if he couldn't, or is it his baby alone? If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd have said that, and then he had hinted at various times he didn't want people to finish his stuff. I think he's softened on that. And he's softened on that because his friends, fellow writers have died. And he said, a few of them, I hope that they've got good notes and somebody can help finish off the story. And I think, and he's talked about Robert Jordan in the past, and basically said that he kind of understood Robert Jordan, who wrote The Wheel of Time. He kind of understood. I think he died of cancer, but he had like 9 months or so that he knew to get everything in order so that he could then pass it on to somebody else. And George R. R. Martin was basically like, yeah, if I had that time, then maybe that's something I could do. So I think the answer now is probably he would. The question is who could do this, and I don't have an answer to that. The obvious Brandon Sanderson answer is Brandon Sanderson has himself been asked and said, no, we're very different writers with very different feels. I couldn't write Grimdark, which is where George R. R. Martin is at. I'd want to be far more optimistic, and that would not be finishing George R. R. Martin's story. So not him. I've heard various other suggestions, but it would nobody immediately springs to mind. Because could you imagine the pressure if you wrote it? Because there will always be people who hate the ending of it because we've been waiting for so long. Okay, I've got one more question from my patrons, and I'll answer a few more from the chat. Catherine Fursith saying, I've been trying to think of which toxic changes, toxic butterflies, that House of the Dragon might be considering for the next seasons. Speculation all, I know, but which considered changes do you think would make George R. R. Martin use such terms? The omission of nettles is the most likely one. Which others would he think would ruin future plot lines in the same way as Maelor Gate? I was thinking Alicent Aemond not expecting a child would be one. Another would be letting Jaehaera take on some of Maelor's storyline, thus no marriage to Aegon, etc. But what do you think? Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating. So basically, he ended that blog post, which he took down, by saying it seems that he's been given an outline draft for seasons 3 and 4, and also he talks to people, and so he's got a vague idea of the things that are being discussed or considered, and on that basis he said he talked about toxic butterflies, if they go ahead with some of the things that are being considered. So it strikes me that yes, obviously one of them is what happens with the implications of Maelor with Helena and things like that. He doesn't like that idea. I completely agree with Nettles. If Nettles was not included, I think he would really not like that. There are a couple of other bits that I don't know whether they would immediately lead to toxic butterflies, but they are changes that have been made that could have implications. So one of them I've already talked about, which is their Alicent and Rhaenyra thing. Ryan Condal very clearly decided that this was the heartbeat of the whole story is the relationship between those two people. And so they had to meet a couple of times in season 2. They couldn't just be separate. They had to meet. And if that continues, then you have to say, okay, how are you going to get these two people to keep interacting? Because basically what should happen is Rhaenyra should take King's Landing. There should be a confrontation between them, and then Helena's put under house arrest and not... Alicent is put under house arrest and not really seen from again. But they won't want that, so they will have to come up with some way for her to be involved and engaged in this and in contact with Rhaenyra. So that could be some route where they're considering a way that George R. R. Martin doesn't like. There's also a few other random things, like, for example, Otto is still alive. Now, he should still be alive, don't get me wrong, in the books, but when Rhaenyra takes King's Landing, which probably should happen in episode 1 of season 3, he's the first to die. She just kills him. But we've seen that he's kept locked up somewhere, presumably somewhere down in the Reach, because that's where he was heading. And I'm going to assume that this means that he then will appear down the Reach. He's going to be our eyes and ears in the Reach when we get the Hightower army heading, making very slow progress, but heading towards King's Landing. So might they then, as they've got a clearly excellent actor in Lisa Fans, and they've got a whole new army and a dragon and things, they will have to do some things there. Maybe he will then start taking on roles of some other characters who are down there, and that might have long-term knock-on effects. I don't know. But yeah, it's all quite speculative, and I wouldn't want to go too far down that rabbit hole of just guessing things that the writers might do, because that seems a little bit unfair to them, because they haven't written it yet. These do seem to just be some ideas that are being thrown around, and when you're at the throwing ideas around stage, then okay, throw some wacky ideas around. This is the whole point, is that you should then be able to get rid of the ideas that are bad. George R. R. Martin clearly has decided to do this through a public forum rather than in private. Right, let's have a quick flick through the chat. Andrew K saying Daemon slips off Caraxes, sword bounces in the air, and he accidentally kills Aemond. Yeah. Let's not go with that. Charis Ballerina saying, or do you think that Cannibal could be Balerion and Vagar's? Balerion scales and Vagar's eyes, and based on his size, it'd be with the right time frame. Or is green and black dragon that eats other dragons just symbolic of the dance itself? Yes, symbolic, but also I think sometimes George R. R. Martin just throws in something just to, like this, just to show us a simple fact that dragons can't all just be bonded with. The fact that he's got a completely feral dragon living there on Dragonstone, that nobody can get near, and just does things that you can't control. I think that just adds to his world building, to show that there are some dragons which are just you can't deal with it. That dragons are not pets, and Cannibal is kind of the proof of it. It's one thing saying, "Oh yeah, sometimes this, you get a big old dragon, then maybe it'll fly off somewhere that you don't want it to." That's one level. Another level is some dragons you just can't even approach because they're dragons and scary. April May saying, I'm really hoping they go into the unclaimed dragons, because those dragons were hatched for a person that was denied their hatchling. And Andrew K saying these 2-year production gaps do seem to hurt many series momentum. Perhaps it's partly due to the sheer amount of content these platforms release to space things out. Yeah, I mean, surely everybody knows this, is that when a new season comes along, you might have quite enjoyed the previous season, but you've probably forgotten half of what happened by the time the new season comes around. In the annual way of things, then it's a lot easier. The way that I suspect they were theoretically planning, whether they still are, I don't know, to do it for Game of Thrones stuff is to have a number of different things happening at the same time. Have the Dragon Demands, incidentally, has done a really interesting kind of speculative video on this a while ago on how this could work as a kind of like a Game of Thrones expanded universe or whatever it is. But you could have your main thing, which is House of the Dragon at the moment, every 2 years, and then that might morph into Aegon's Conquest, and then that might morph into the Mad King's Ascent and Fall or whatever. That being your big centerpiece thing, which takes 2 years for each season to happen. But between that, you have annual stuff, which, like Dunk and Egg, like if we get the animated adventures of Corlys Velaryon, these kinds of things which keep you interested in the world and keep the fan base engaged. So you've got regular content, not as much as we get on something like Marvel, where every couple of months we get a new film or TV show or something. I think people have felt that was too much, but certainly one thing or maybe 2 things per year to keep people engaged. I think that's the plan. Wilma 26, do you think George R. Martin is upset about the butterfly effect because of how Game of Thrones ended? Do you think something that seemed small was changed, then couldn't end in his vision because of that change? Yeah, I think that's a massive part of his thinking and feeling. I think he probably also felt that he couldn't say anything then, but now, why not? It's that, what has he got to lose? Doesn't make any difference. What happened, he didn't like, obviously, a lot of what happened with Game of Thrones at the end, and he, in very diplomatic language, he basically said the TV show is different to my books, and that's sort of where he's not gone with this. I personally, I think that's probably a better place. If he wishes to make his comments, of course, he can make his comments to the showrunners, but to do it in public, I don't think that's helped anyone personally. Right, I think with that, I will start bringing this one to a close. But next week we're going to go back to doing a topic I haven't decided yet. We'll do a Song of Ice and Fire topic, and the first half of the live stream we'll be doing a deep dive into that. The second half we'll look at things like the Rings of Power, and we'll just get back into doing the topic stuff for these live streams, I think. But if you are watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere around here is a link to other live streams that I've done. If you're interested, somewhere around here will be a link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. That is all for this time. I will be back this time next week with another live stream. 2 or 3 videos a week are coming out at the moment on the main channel. Take care, everyone, and I will see you soon.